The criminal mastermind, who almost got away. The crowd inside the Paris airport buzzed with noise. Travelers rushing in every direction, unaware that history was about to be made. A young man with sharp eyes and a confident walk moved calmly through the terminal. He looked like any other tourist, carrying a small bag in his hand. But this wasn't just any traveler. This was Frank Abagnale Jr., the most wanted con artist in the world, and the FBI had finally tracked him here. Just as he handed his ticket to the airline worker, footsteps thundered from behind. "FBI, stop right there!" shouted an agent. The entire airport froze. People turned to see what was happening. Frank's heart raced, but his face remained calm. He glanced over his shoulder, saw the men in dark suits running toward him, and for a split second, he smirked. For years, he had fooled banks, airlines, and even hospitals. Could he really be caught now? Or would he pull off one more escape, right under their noses? That was the question everyone watching wanted answered. But before we get to how this shocking chase began, we need to go back to the life of a boy who should have been ordinary, but who turned into the most brilliant young trickster America had ever seen. Frank Abagnale Jr. was born in 1948 in Bronxville, New York. He was the third of 4 children, raised in a middle-class family. His father, Frank Sr., was a strong figure in his life. He owned a small stationery business, was well known in the community, and taught Frank Jr. how to charm people with words. His mother, Paulette, was French, elegant, and loving. To outsiders, their family seemed perfect, but behind closed doors, things were falling apart. When Frank was a teenager, his parents' marriage crumbled. Divorce was rare in the 1960s, and the breakup devastated him. He had to choose which parent to live with, and the pain of that choice shook him deeply. For the first time in his life, Frank felt powerless. He wanted control, he wanted freedom, and he wanted to prove he didn't need anyone telling him what to do. That was the spark that lit the fire. Frank's first crimes were small. At just 15, he discovered he could trick gas station attendants. He would give them a check for more money than the gas cost, and they would hand him back the change in cash. It was so simple, and it worked. He realized he could live a bigger life with his brain than most people did with their hands. By the time he was 16, his schemes were bolder. He dressed older, acted smarter, and carried himself with a confidence far beyond his years. But Frank wanted more than just pocket change. He wanted to live like the rich businessmen he saw in New York City. That's when he set his eyes on one of the most glamorous jobs in the world, an airline pilot. Pilots traveled everywhere for free, wore crisp uniforms, and were respected wherever they went. Frank thought, why not me? He studied everything he could about Pan Am Airlines. He read aviation magazines, listened carefully to conversations between pilots, and even visited airports to watch how they walked, talked, and carried themselves. Then, using nothing more than charm and clever tricks, Frank convinced a uniform company to give him a real Pan Am pilot suit. Soon, the teenage boy who once hustled gas stations was striding through airports as Captain Frank. Wearing the uniform was only the beginning. Frank learned a trick called deadheading, where pilots could ride flights for free if they were off duty. He walked up to flight counters, flashed his uniform, and was given first-class seats without paying a dime. He flew all over the world like this: New York, Miami, Paris, Rome, traveling thousands of miles without ever spending a cent. People saw the uniform and never questioned him. But Frank wasn't satisfied with just free flights. He had bigger plans. With fake checks, he began cashing in millions of dollars at banks. He would print Pan Am logos on the checks, and the banks, trusting the airline's reputation, would hand him cash without hesitation. Frank always stayed one step ahead, moving from city to city, country to country, before anyone could catch on. The FBI eventually noticed. A teenager was cashing checks worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, flying around the world like a ghost. They had no name, no face, just whispers of a mystery man known as the Skyway Man. That's when Carl Hanratty, a determined FBI agent, entered the picture. Hanratty made it his mission to catch Frank, no matter how long it took. The chase between them was like a game of cat and mouse. In one city, Hanratty would arrive at a bank only to discover Frank had been there the day before. In another, he would hear witnesses describe the young pilot who charmed them, only to realize Frank had already boarded another flight under a different name. Each time Hanratty thought he was close, Frank slipped away again. But Frank didn't stop with pilots. He pushed his luck further. In Georgia, he forged a medical degree and posed as a doctor in a hospital. He led a team of interns, making life-and-death decisions, all while barely knowing what he was doing. He managed to escape when the risks became too high, but not before earning the respect of real doctors who never suspected the truth. Next, he pretended to be a lawyer. Using books from a library, he studied just enough to pass as a legal expert. Soon, he was giving advice in a state attorney's office. Each role he played gave him power, money, and status, things he craved since his parents' divorce. The world was his stage, and Frank was the star actor. Yet no matter how clever he was, the walls were closing in. The FBI was watching closely, and each trick brought him closer to disaster. Frank lived with one foot in luxury and the other in danger, knowing every knock on the door could be the end. Then came the moment that would shake him the most. One evening, while hiding in a small apartment in France, Frank heard sirens outside. At first, he thought they were just passing by, but then came the sound of footsteps, many of them storming up the staircase. He rushed to the window, heart pounding, only to see agents surrounding the building. Frank knew this could be it. The boy who had tricked the world might finally be caught. He pressed his back against the wall, his mind racing with one desperate question. Could he escape one more time? And just as the door burst open, everything changed. The door slammed open with a deafening crash, and armed agents poured into the dim apartment. Flashlights cut through the shadows, beams of white light bouncing across the walls. Frank's heart pounded like a drum in his chest, but his face stayed calm, almost too calm for someone about to be arrested. The lead FBI agent, Carl Hanratty, stepped forward, gun raised, his eyes locked on the young man who had outsmarted him for years. "Frank Abagnale Jr., it's over!" Hanratty shouted. The room went silent, the tension thick enough to choke on. For a moment, it looked like the game was finished. But then, in a shocking twist, Frank smirked and said, "Gentlemen, you've made a mistake. I'm not your man." His words were so confident, so sharp, that even the agents hesitated. Could he still talk his way out of this? Frank's mind raced. He remembered every time he had worn the uniform of a Pan Am pilot and walked through airports as if he owned the world. He remembered passing as a doctor, a lawyer, and even a professor. Could this be another moment where words would save him? But as Hanratty stepped closer, the weight of years of running pressed down on him. For the first time, Frank realized the game might finally be over. Years. Earlier, Frank had perfected the art of disappearing. After forging pilot uniforms, he learned the secrets of airports. He could walk into a terminal and board a plane to anywhere, often without even needing a ticket. Flight crews respected him, passengers admired him, and bank tellers trusted him. To them, he was the face of Pan Am Airlines, and that face never raised suspicion. But Frank didn't just want to fly. He wanted money. With fake checks, he built an empire of lies. He printed Pan Am logos on slips of paper, walked into banks, and walked out with thousands of dollars. Sometimes he'd charm the teller with his pilot's uniform. Other times he would casually drop hints about flying across the Atlantic, making himself sound too important to question. The system wasn't ready for someone like him. While Frank lived like royalty, luxury hotels, fine dinners, and first-class flights, the FBI struggled to keep up. Carl Hanratty became obsessed. He traveled from city to city, following the trail of forged checks and false identities. In Miami, he just missed Frank at a bank. In Los Angeles, he arrived at a hotel hours after Frank had checked out. In New Orleans, a clerk described the pilot who charmed her, and Hanratty realized he was still one step behind. But Frank's boldness grew risky. In Georgia, he pretended to be a doctor named Frank Connors. He supervised interns, gave orders in the emergency room, and even bluffed his way through surgeries by letting others handle the hard parts. For months, no one doubted him. But one evening, he nearly killed a patient when his lack of medical knowledge was exposed. That close call forced him to leave the hospital behind. Not long after, in Louisiana, Frank tried a new disguise: a lawyer. Using borrowed books, he crammed just enough legal knowledge to pass as an attorney. Soon, he was working in a state office giving advice on real cases. But every new role was a gamble, and every gamble increased the risk of being caught. He knew the FBI was close, but he couldn't stop. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about the thrill. And that thrill came crashing down in France. As Hanratty cornered him in the apartment, Frank felt the weight of every crime he had committed. He thought about the gas station schemes, the pilot's wings, the white doctor's coat, the lawyer's suit. For years, he had lived as anyone but himself. Now, standing in front of the FBI, he was just Frank Abagnale Jr., a 21-year-old kid with nowhere left to run. Hanratty lowered his gun slightly, staring at the young man he had hunted across the globe. "It's over, kid," he said firmly. "No more games." But Frank's smirk didn't fade. He glanced at the window, then at the agents. His mind spun with one last plan, one last desperate attempt to slip away. And in that instant, with the world closing in around him, Frank made his move.